You know, I started doing jiu-jitsu about 8 years ago now, give or take a bit of time. And when I started then, I was close to 500 pounds and lost 200 pounds doing jiu-jitsu and changing my lifestyle around jiu-jitsu so I could perform it more correctly, really. I'd go get on a normal scale and just be like, error, get the fuck off this scale. That actually, years ago when I first started getting into training in general, I worked at a factory and I would go weigh myself on the industrial pallet scale so I could get like an accurate reading, because like most scales were too garbage. I would sneak over and use the fucking shipping scale, be like, cool, and leave. It's super common sort of mentality to think like, I'm out of shape, my body can't do this cool thing that I would love to try or whatever it is. And so you sort of convince yourself to not go. And I've encountered that for sure. I've met other big guys along the way that I thought were going to become good training partners for me and things like that. And I'd ask them like, oh, you're coming to do class? And they'd come once and, you know, say, oh, it was really fun, but it was tough. And maybe I'll try it again down the line when I've lost some weight. But the reality is you probably won't if that's what you're saying, just because it's already the excuse to not do it. And I'm not saying it's easy. Like, it was being a really heavy guy doing jiu-jitsu, it's challenging. It's challenging to do the movements correctly, to learn how to utilize your body correctly. And it's challenging sometimes, depending on what gym you're at, to find training partners. I've trained at several gyms now over the years before coming here, and definitely struggled at certain gyms that are more competitive in the sort of IBJJF circuit. I've struggled to find guys that wanted to train with me just because they would never face someone my size, so they didn't really want to even spar with someone my size for concern that they might get injured and it might prevent them from doing a competition. And so I've always kind of tried to tailor my jiu-jitsu off of being and acting more like I was a small guy rather than a big guy, because I didn't want to injure somebody and I didn't want them to not want to train with me because they felt that I was just a big, rough sort of bully. Because a lot of big guys that I have trained with do utilize their attributes. They're going to try and apply that weight to you, use the pressure right from the beginning. It's essential at some point to do that, but along the way, I find for most big guys it can also be a detriment, because you don't have to learn to use your body as fluidly when you, right from the get-go, start just trying to smush people with your sort of size. You can get pretty far doing that, but after a while you start to lack because you're just so used to that one approach. And so I think it was more rewarding, even though it was a struggle, because I continued to come even though I was already heavy. Because as much as it was a struggle to, say, learn a new movement because of my extra weight, once I dialed in my lifestyle and started to lose weight, every 10, 20 pounds you start to sort of unlock new movements, which was really fun. Like, as much as it could be a challenge, like every time you got on the scale and you're 20 pounds lighter, next thing you know is you'd break through a bit of a mental plateau and realize that you're starting to actually invert in a place where you normally never could. And that is a response that is supposed to happen. And so you go, oh cool, like this is here now. If I put some time into this place, I'll actually develop this movement that I see other people I admire utilize so easily. And now I can actually attempt to do that. So it's like leveling up a new ability, just like in a video game, which is funny. Two very important areas for big guys to focus on are movement-based passing and guard retention. I think those are two skills that like are not always, but in a little bit of a generalization, like weaker amongst bigger practitioners of jiu-jitsu. And yet, to me, like they were kind of essential in the sense that like what made me interested in jiu-jitsu was the fancy guard work and how that sort of was unique to it compared to other forms of grappling like judo and things like that, which have a much more limited approach to their ground combat. And so I always thought that that was a neat thing that set Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu sort of aside from other forms of grappling. And yet it was also something that I found a lot of big guys neglected. And I think the reason is because it's more challenging. It's much easier when you're on top and you're the big guy because you got that weight, you have that strength advantage potentially to sort of abuse, especially in the gi. You can get a solid grip and you can really just be in the driver's seat, especially if you have a good 100 pounds on someone. They might be just as good, but it could just be too much mass for them to deal with because it can be so overwhelming. And as someone who's always had like 100 to 150 pounds on most of their training partners, learning how to pass while being mobile seemed like the right approach, because it allowed me to have more training partners, because they weren't as afraid to train with me, basically, for risk of some random injury like me falling on them, or just like a brutal knee on belly type pass that led to some sort of rib injury. Like I've caused some. It's been accidental, but I mean, it's definitely possible. And so like approaching training that way opened me up to have more training partners, to improve people's trust in training with me, which I think was important, because you learn so much from training with people of all different body types. Like training with other big guys can suck because it's so grueling at times, because you know you're going to deal with pressure most likely and a lot extra weight, and so it's a different thing. But training with the smaller guys is just as important, because you know they're going to be quicker than you, that they probably won't tire out as fast as you. And so your movements, if you want to maintain pace with them the whole time, have to be that much more precise, so that they don't just run around you because you're too slow. When I first came here to Island Top Team, one of the first guys I got to train with was one of our old students who moved away, named Chase. And he's like, I don't know, maybe 130 pounds, 120 pounds. And he was just guillotining me and reverse armbarring me over and over again. And it makes me laugh. And that's precisely why I like jiu-jitsu, is the fact that here's someone who, on paper, if someone were to make their argument, shouldn't have the advantage, because he's got such a drastic weight difference compared to me. And yet, the thing that made me love jiu-jitsu is that I've had multiple encounters with people that much smaller than me who just completely ruined me. And that's what made me excited about it, is that it's such a mechanical advantage that someone who is much smaller and has all of these sort of lesser attributes to a certain degree, not that that's necessarily the right word, can still have like complete victory over someone that should potentially, according to like some people, win. And so it's a bit of an investment in losing, which I think is why jiu-jitsu is so powerful. Is it's like trial by fire to a certain degree. If you have the right instruction, the right people to show you how to do the correct movements, you're still going to get smashed a lot, especially as a big person learning to do guard work and things like that. You're definitely going to get passed a ton, and it will suck. It's very frustrating at times, but looking at it a different way was what helped me, was appreciating the little victories. Like, even when it was someone who was drastically more skilled than me, if I could take someone like yourself, who was a brown belt at the time, and make you go through 4 of my guard retention movements before you pass me and submit me versus 1, then that was a victory for me. I felt like I had achieved something, because I'm going through more complicated sequences. I'm making you have to time yourself better and not just rely on pass A to work. You're going all the way to D at this point, which is sort of the battle. Like, we all get obsessed with the submission, and a lot of big guys can take a little bit too much pride in that. Like, get right to mount, go for an easy Americana or something like that, which is, to me, kind of a waste of time. Like, I used to do stuff like that too, but it doesn't teach you how to move and do like critical things that are important at the higher level, if that's what your goal is. And so I think it's important to invest in loss, whether it be investing in losing because you might get passed, you might get submitted, or you might lose submissions or attempts at them because you're not going for those easy strongman submissions. You're spending time on actually creating opportunities through movement to get to someone's back versus just crushing them into the mat and trying to get an easy grind out from mount. There are times when that's important to train, of course, but when you're drilling or sparring with someone that you have 120 pounds on or whatever, that's really not the time to do that. One of the most interesting challenges is like watching it, being present in class, participating, and understanding what you're seeing, being able to explain the mechanics of what you're seeing, but your body literally just can't perform it because you don't have the muscle control. You're too heavy, and all these things, like just the simplest things as mobilizing your hips, which might seem second nature and easy for somebody who walks in the door who's of a normal body size. That was super challenging for me. And so it's like, it was a lot of frustration and like having to almost like a child learn how to move and take those incremental gains and use those as ways to lose weight so that you could add more movement, more complicated things into your sort of style. It was super challenging at different periods, especially at like, depending on what we were training. Because there was a lot of time where like my goal was more to be just a good training partner than it was to even get better. Because I'd be like, oh, well, if I do this or even overcommit my weight into this position, there's a chance they might not even be able to do the move correctly just because they're a normal sized person dealing with 3 times, 4 times the amount of weight that they would maybe actually do this on someone. So, and the size of me, just my general girth at that point made certain things very challenging, which, you know, leads to more false positives on my part where I think that I'm great at getting out of something or dealing with something, but really my body type just made it next to impossible for somebody to perform a triangle on me or something like that without it being flawless because I was just so thick. When I first started, I wore an A5 or an A6, depending on the company. But I also had to get all of my gi pants. The gi tops were fine. They were usually fine. An A5 usually fit pretty well. But I had to get all of my gi pants professionally tailored just so that they would fit because I have very thick legs, even still. And so I would buy like an A6 or an A5 gi and the top would fit fine, but the pants were like skin tight. And I would basically, I've torn a few right down the crotch trying to do like throws and kneeling and stuff like that, and they're way too tight. So I would go in and the tailor would slice them all the way up the pant and add in, you know, a couple inches worth of extra fabric just so that I could train, which made all of my gis no longer legal for tournaments. But thankfully the tournaments that we did back then weren't big sticklers for that kind of stuff. But yeah, I used to have to spend like $100 extra per gi to tailor it just so it would fit, and now I can wear an A4 comfortably without having to do anything to it, which is nice. I've never like been a big fan of like super motivational stories because I think they can be so cheesy, but the thing that I think is the most important is that like if you want to do something and it's something that you think about a lot, like whether it be jiu-jitsu or some other activity, like don't let something like your own mind and your ego control whether you do it or not. Like it would have been really easy for me, and I have in other activities, to just walk away and go, I'm not suited to this, I'm too big, I'm too whatever. It's really easy to make those kinds of excuses, and if it's something you really find yourself interested in or passionate about, don't let that be your excuse, because it can also be a powerful motivation. And so why I found once I started shaping my motivation around the fact that I wanted to be good at this, that this was something I actually cared enough about to suffer through, then, you know, losing weight and being heavier were no longer like roadblocks, but rather just opportunities to get better. Like I've faced different challenges than other people might face when they start training, and everyone will, but they made me better for it. And now I have my own unique style of doing things that I've built over a lot of hurdles and problems that were frustrating at the time and took me a little longer than other people to get where I am, but I still got to where I am. And so I think that's really what matters. Is people always say it's a personal journey in jiu-jitsu. You get wherever you can get, you know, on your own merit and things like that. Somebody might get there in 2 years, it might take you 6, but if you still got to the same place, then you're still there. You still have those skills, and you know the belt is nice, but once you have the skills appropriate for the color of your belt, like those don't go away. You've earned those.
Bunch of thirsty blue belts right now.
Yeah, so we got some belts to get up today. Why am I getting all worked up? I guess, I'll just, Mark, come up here and get your belt, and then I'll start talking. know I overuse the phrase that somebody is like a perfect example of Island Top Jiu-Jitsu, but Mark is a perfect example of Island Top Jiu-Jitsu. It's a guy who's been here for a couple of years and, like, correct me if I'm wrong, basically moved to Nanaimo to train with us. So like there's no shortage of dedication, amazing teammate. Obviously his body's changed a lot as a result of jiu-jitsu, but also as a result of his attitude and his dedication. You know, the trip to No-Gi Worlds recently was just like a fantastic display. Like a guy who has not competed very much and who locally doesn't get a chance to compete against anybody who's kind of anywhere near his level. And so stepping up to the level that you see at No-Gi Worlds, still showed excellent jiu-jitsu, showed the exact opposite of a big guy game, pulling guards, sweeping, that kind of stuff. Definitely shows how much we put an emphasis on being properly technical in here, having a variety of movement and not relying on attributes. And aside from being a perfect example of just island top in jiu-jitsu in general, he's a perfect example of how you can dedicate yourself to training properly and not abuse attributes and become incredibly technical, fantastic movement, guard work, leg locks, like nothing you'd expect to see from looking at a guy like this. He's just a very diverse, well-rounded grappler. I'm really proud to promote him to purple belt. So.
It's worth the frustration when you're starting out heavier, because it kind of like, the reason I love jiu-jitsu is because it kind of taught me to have fun with my own body again, which is something I hadn't really done since I was like a kid, when I would, you know, wrestle or whatever with friends and like was in better shape. But as you become an adult and you like lose mobility in certain ways, you forget what kind of like playful fun you can have with your own body, and jiu-jitsu gave me that back, because it was something that lets you move in cool, unique ways that, you know, are very structurally functional, but they also look extremely fancy and fluid sometimes, and make you feel like you're a little ninja compared to a big oaf, which is how I felt in lots of other ways. So it was worth sort of the struggle of being the slower learner to sort of get that gain in the end.